So last time my EEG worked fine, and everything just sort of worked, except for that one part in the recording where it didn't just work. Well, I should have paid more attention to that, because it turns out I still have problems with DC offset. So I talked to my friend who did EEG work, and he said that, yes, not only will the electrode skin interface generate its own voltage, but that voltage will actually be on the order of a volt. And not only that, but it's pretty heavily dependent on how much pressure you put on the electrode. So that's bad news bears for me, but it might not actually be that bad. What matters here is not the voltage at each electrode, but the difference in voltage between the two electrodes, because that's what shows up as a DC offset at the output. So I'm going to try and measure that difference in voltage between the two electrodes, and play around with how much pressure I put on the electrodes to come up with the worst case, add a little bit of safety margin on top of that, and lower the gain of the front end to allow it to pass that DC value without railing the outputs. I've also changed my electrode setup a little bit. I got some twisted pair wire and twisted a third wire into it, so now it's twisted triple, I guess. And then I soldered some pennies onto the end of it. This should work out a lot better than those alligator clips. First of all, it's longer, so I don't have to sit so close to the desk. It should be easier to attach the electrode pennies there. And also, since the wires are so tightly twisted together, I should pick up a lot less noise this way. And I'll talk about why in a later video. This video is still about DC offset. So I modified this circuit a bit. I took the gain of the front end down to 3. I'm just using 1 kilo ohm resistors everywhere. The back end still has a gain of 1, just like in the last video. And the DC offset correction loop was replaced with the variable resistor again, so I can adjust that by hand. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is take all the electrodes and connect them together. So I should have 0 volts at the input. And then I can adjust this knob to go to 0. Alright, let's turn this bit. And so once I have this set to 0, that will have calibrated out all the impairments of the op amps. And then when I put these pennies all up on my chest, any DC offset I read will be coming only from the electrodes. Now I attach all these pennies to me and look at the DC offset. So now that that's all calibrated, I've got the pennies taped on. And when I push on them, I can sort of change the DC offset around as I'm changing the voltage on each of the electrodes. The worst I've seen so far is about, yeah, right there, about 220 millivolts. 240 is pretty bad. Keep in mind this is also going through a gain of 3 at the front end, so 240 millivolts here is about 80 millivolts. Alright, so this gives me an idea of roughly how bad I could expect the DC offset to get. I'm going to add some of this conductive jelly into it since I'm not using that right now. I'll see if this changes it much. Alright, now I've got the conductive jelly on, and that voltage dropped pretty significantly. Oh, nope. There, it's back up again. I guess it really just depends mostly on how much pressure I'm putting on these. It looks like 240 millivolts is the worst I've seen at the output, which is 80 millivolts at the input. So now Jason's circuit for his homemade ECG makes a bit more sense to me. He had a front-end gain of 20, which I thought was a bit low when I designed mine with a front-end gain of 100. So maybe he had a good reason for that, and maybe this was that reason. And also, since I had a back-end gain of 1 in my circuit, I would either have to have another amplifier afterwards, after I remove the DC offset to gain it up a bit more, or I could have more gain in the back end and remove the DC offset before it gets to the back end, which is what Jason did here. So Jason's homemade ECG circuit is starting to look a bit more attractive to me. So I'm going to lower my front end gain and switch my offset correction loop, put it in between the front end and back end. Basically make my circuit more like Jason's for the next video. So there you have it, more DC offset problems with my circuit, but next time I should have that fixed, and then I can move on to solving the noise problem.